I'm assuming people already have some experience of Houdini because we did the basic one last week. So I'm going to just literally talk about dynamics and VFX in Houdini, because Houdini is used for a couple of things. It's used for sort of procedural modeling, layout, and procedural tools and stuff, and also for simulations, which is what it's famous for. And it can do lots and lots of different types of simulations. So we're going to look at a simple sort of destruction, and then we're going to add some smoke and dust bits to it. So to do that, I'm going to start at this top level here, which we call the object level, and I'm going to create a geometry object by hitting tab and typing geometry, which will create a geometry object here. So I'm going to double click that to dive inside. So in here, I'm just going to hit tab again and create a box. So I'm going to go slow, hopefully that you might be able to follow along, but if not, you can watch it and learn hopefully some tips. Remember to ask questions in the Q&A if you want to ask anything or me to clarify anything, or you can type it in the chat, but I may miss it. So I'm going to make a box, and this is what I'm going to break up. So in Houdini, we've got some amazing tools called the material fracture tools, and these will allow us to create simple shapes, things like glass, concrete, and wood. So most of the basic materials are used for destruction, but there are ways to create custom shapes as well if you want, but we're going to stick with the basic ones, have a quick run through of those. So first I'm going to start with a box. Now the important thing about all simulations is you want to make sure that you're working at the correct scale. The scene scale is important because physics is physics. You know, big things appear to move smaller than small things because often they're far away and moving large distances. You know, think of an aeroplane traveling hundreds of miles an hour. It looks like it's slow in the sky because it's big and far away. You know, if you were close to it, it whizzed past you. And you know, if it was small but close to you, it would look like it was going slower, that kind of thing. So well, the point is physics is physics. You know, you need to build things to scale for it to work. So Houdini treats 1 unit as 1 meter. So this is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So let's make this a bit bigger, something like 3 meters by 1.5 meters by 0.1, sort of 10 centimeters. So we've got a thin wall there. Maybe make that a bit thinner, 5 centimeters thick or something. There we go. We've got the proportion of our wall set up. I also want it to sit on the floor or the grid. I could translate it like I do in other softwares, but I like to build a bit of a procedural element in here. And what I mean by that is I like to make things automatic. So if you're building tools in this, that's a great way of working. We'll do a webinar one day on procedural modeling and approaches for that. But I like to use this match size node, which uses the input object's bounding box to move it around. And you can also use a reference object to move it around too, so you can match other objects' bounding boxes with another object, so you can move them to the same position, basically. So here the justify is where you can do it. And we can say put it on the minimum or the bottom of the bounding box, and you'll see it puts the pivot. I mean, if I hit enter, you'll see the pivot is at the center here. And then on the match size, the pivot hasn't moved. We've just put the pivot on the bottom. So that effectively moves the object up like this. So now it's sitting on the floor. The advantage of this is I can change the size of the box and it always stays on the floor. And if I actually plug in some test geometry like a pig head to the same node, you'll see that also sits on the floor. The original was under the floor. So it doesn't matter what you plug in, it's always going to set it to the origin for you. It's also actually setting the X and the Y to the center. So even if I offset these, let me offset my original pig. You'll see the match size puts it back to the origin. So this is awesome. It means when you build tools, people don't have to model it around the origin. They can have it anywhere. And then you reset it to the origin so you can do clever stuff with it. Anyway, let's plug the box back in. Anyway, we've built some behavior in, which is really cool. It's a good idea to save these things. So let me just save this in case we have a crash. So I'm going to hit tab, and what we're going to do is actually look in these RBD tools. The RBD stands for Rigid Body Dynamics, and there's a whole bunch of tools here. These are basically higher level digital assets, excuse me, that create the geometry and can create the attributes and can create the constraints, the 3 things you need to do interesting simulations in Houdini. So these are what I mean by digital asset is it's like a collection of a node network that's been flattened down and just gives you controls at certain points. I mean, if I look inside the match size, you'll see it's made of other nodes. These are sort of just a network like the one we're making, but they've been encapsulated in what we call digital asset, which has just given us these controls for the features. And this is what you make when you make tools later on. So these are a high level tool, which saves you having to do all this stuff manually. Back in the day, we had to do it all manually. So this makes life really easy. And they're moving this way for people to get into Houdini and be able to create some cool stuff a lot quicker without having to get very technical, which is awesome, especially for people getting into it, because you can set up cool stuff and then you can kind of investigate what you've done and start to work out the attributes later. Obviously, if you come on the course, we teach you all about the attributes from day one, so you can build these kind of tools yourself if you want to do extra custom stuff. But the bit I want to use here is called RBD material fracture. And it takes a second to load in because it's got quite a complicated behavior to it. Now, actually, if you go to the model menu here, if you click on shatter, this will actually break up your geometry using what's called Voronoi noise. And this is a very simple version of fracturing stuff. This tool encapsulates that plus a whole load of other features to give you realistic shapes when you break stuff. So the idea is that we're going to break this up. We're going to give relationships between the pieces to tell them how to stick back together again like glue. And then we're going to use a simulation to make it fall apart naturally. So what we can do is just simply plug our geometry into the left input here and turn this fracture on. You'll see it takes a second as it processes, and then it breaks up my wall. Well, it creates these lines. We can actually preview that using another one of those RBD tools. We do RBD exploded view. We plug in the three inputs. What you'll see, it separates it out, and we can see what the pieces would look like. Well, if they fell apart, so we can see the shapes we're making. So it's a great way to preview what you've done if this doesn't make too much sense. So what we've done is we've actually got two levels of fracture. It's doing the big shapes and then fracturing those again into these small ones. I only want one level, so I'm going to click minus. So we have one level now, and you'll see we just get these big shapes on there. So the thing about this tool, if we go up to the top, we have presets. We can fracture this like concrete. If we choose glass, we'll get glass-like patterns. You can control the number of points, etc. And if we choose wood, you get wood-like patterns. Now, what's interesting about the wood, this is not what the wood looks like. If I just go to cluster and turn on the visualizer, it'll actually break up into these shapes. So if I turn on the exploded view, you'll see that's what we'll get with the wood. So you can create some very interesting fractures. Let's go back to the concrete for now. Doesn't much look like concrete. So what we can do, we can make this look a bit better. So what I like to do is I like to first of all go to one of my fractures and increase the number of points it's breaking. Basically what it's doing is putting a point here and then it's drawing straight lines around it, and then it creates this cellular pattern from the points. So the center of each of these cells is where a point is, and you can see we have very few points here and we'd have a lot of points around here. They're not distributed that evenly across the surface, and that's because down here we've applied a noise which is black and white. So where the area is white, we're getting more points, and where it's darker, we're getting less points, and you get this non-uniform distribution. If you make the noise a high frequency, then you'll get a much more even distribution of your fracture. If you bring it down, then you'll get a less even distribution. Now, the thing about natural fractures is they're not very even. You tend to find you get a few big pieces, you get quite a lot more smaller pieces, and you get even more tinier pieces, and then you get a huge amount of microscopic pieces. So the smaller scale you get, the more you get. So you want to kind of reflect that kind of distribution. So this kind of looks cool. I've got some big pieces, I've got a few more smaller and a few more smaller again. So this might be a good starting point. I might increase the scatter points just to make that more complicated. Let's maybe try something even higher. So we've got some very distinct areas where it's going to break up. So again, we can check out what our noise pattern would look like. So we can make those areas bigger, or we can try and make them smaller. Maybe something like that might look a bit more interesting. And look, we can offset the noise. So I can put more of the broken bits in the middle if I want. Let's try minus. So let's try -2 or something. There we go. So I'm getting many more here in the center, which is what I'm going to break up. So maybe something like this would be interesting. Let's just bring that down a bit. There we go. Oh, I want negative numbers. There we go. Let's maybe put 3 by 3 by 3. Cool. So the other thing we can do here is let's just bring that, yeah, let's put that there, is to break up these shapes. This doesn't look very natural as a shape goes. So what we can do is we can click on detail and add edge detail. And if you watch these straight edges here, this will take a second because we've got a lot of pieces. I might reduce the number of pieces for speed, actually. There we go. Can you see they get a little bit wobbly? It looks a little bit more natural. Let me reduce the number of pieces. So maybe go for 200 for now. You see it takes a second while it wobbles. There you go. You can see the wobbly edges. So in the detail here, if I increase the size, the height, that'll make them more wobbly. There we go. So that's looking much more like the concrete I'm after. There's something else we can do to make this even more natural and break up the distribution of these pieces even further by adding chipping. If I click on chipping, look at the corners now. You'll see the corners will break off and we'll get lots of tiny little chips everywhere. There we go. Can you see we get these little on the corners there? If I increase the corner ratio, they'll go in deeper. And if I do the chipping ratio, we'll get more of the corners chipping. So I'm just going to increase that a bit so we get a lot more finer pieces. So when these break apart, we'll see small pieces coming out from the big cracks. And that looks a lot more natural to kind of how a concrete wall, in my mind, obviously you're going to use a reference, can break up. So this tool's got some very, very good controls for concrete. So what I'm going to do actually is, yeah, let's turn on the fracture namespace and let's call this wall break. So what this will do, it'll just give it a name that we can use later on when we try and control stuff. So what I want to do now is, it's actually, if we have a look at this exploded view, you'll see we've got these big pieces and you'll notice this white line around them. The white line actually is what we call a proxy, and that's out this third input. The white line object is what the simulator is actually going to simulate because it can't handle these complicated shapes. That's how it's able to simulate hundreds of pieces. Now in this visualize, where is it? In the, there you go, bullet sim geo. Let's turn that on. See, the blue one is actually what the bullet is going to see. And you'll see it does an approximation of, at the best it can, of some of the shapes. If we turn on show constraints, you'll see that they're all connected together from the center. So this is our glue. Look, we can do the uniform scale actually to bring that back, but they're all connected with these lines, and that's what comes out this pink one. If I create a null, I can show you that actually. So out this first input, we get the high res geometry with the wiggly edges. Out this last input, we get the straight one, which is the bullet, the proxy for bullet. And out the middle one, we get the network that joins them together. If I template this, you'll see it's from the centers. So this is our constraints, we call it. And this can build behaviors between the individual pieces, like they can snap like glue, or they can pretend that they're still connected with like a rubbery glue and stretch a bit. So we'll look at how we can control these constraints in a moment. So what I want to do is create a constraint property node, so RBD constraint property, because I want to be able to change the properties of these constraints. So let me plug this in. And this just adds attributes to those white lines. Let me plug that in. You'll see there's no change. We can do things like change color. So you can see we're affecting that. And we can change values here. So at the moment it's defined as glue and it's got a strong strength. We'll come back to this in a minute. So now that we've broken it up and we've configured the constraints, what we want to do now is actually give it the physical properties for the simulator. So tell it how much the density is and how much bounce there should be and friction and stuff. So it has the physical properties we need. So for that, we use an RBD configure node. So we configure its properties. Again, let me plug this in. Oh, has an extra input. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this now, if I look at the attributes, let's plug that one in. You'll see we've got bounce and density, and we have these attributes that the next node we're going to use will be able to use. You'll notice we don't see the breaks anymore. If I go into wireframe, they're still there. That's because we've changed the geometry type for efficiency. So we've set up all the physical properties, and we're going to use what's called a solver now. And what a solver does, it takes all those physical properties and it does the physics expressions and calculations and works out how these pieces should move frame by frame. And then we get our simulation. That's basically the gist of it. Can you create a fracture pattern off a image? Yes, you can. On this node, you'll notice there's an output here where you can add extra points or cutter geometry. So you can add in your own, if you created the geometry in the pattern that you wanted from an image, there is a trace SOP, which will bring in a black and white image and create some geometry. You could extrude that and use that as a cutter, and then it would cut the shapes that you wanted. So you can do that with this node. Actually, I wonder if I can just demonstrate it with a grid. Actually, let's just pop the grid up here for now. So let's put the grid there. Let's disable that fracture. Let's turn this on. So yeah, oh, there's my grid. So I think I need to add a fracture here. And then on the input points, turn off the scatter. Hello. There we go. Oh, want to do that. What's going on here? Let's wait for that to reevaluate. So yeah, you should be able to put, you can plug in your own points here. I've not actually done it with geometry, but I've done it with points. But we are using a geometry grid there. That's not really fracturing it very nicely. I'm going to turn that one off. So yeah, that wants impact points, cutter geometry. Oh yeah, we've got to set this to custom, that's why. So input cutting geometry, there we go. So let's set that to 0. So look there, you can see my grid here. Now it's cutting it. You can see the line in the middle there. If I rotate the grid, you can see that's slicing it in two. If we look at the fracture, you'll see it's doing it. And then what you can do is you can add a trace SOP. The trace SOP takes an image, a black and white image, and creates geometry for it. So you could, create a black and white image of it, create the geometry, and then use that, and then use this in the custom mode here to then fracture up your geometry how you wanted. So, have I broken this now? Enable fracture. There we go. Hopefully that answers your question there, Darren. No problem. There's lots of features to this node, so you can really customize what you need to do there. Cool. So we've got our constraints defined. We've got our configured, our geometry configured. There we go. So let's add our solver, RBD solver. Excuse me. Plug this in. So this will do the physics for us. So basically, all we have to do, let me turn the clock on so it runs as close to real time as it can. So if I press play, physics kicks in and it drops because there's no floor there. So we can go to ground and turn on ground plane. So again, this is a digital asset of a proper complete dot network here. Saves you having to set it all up, which is really handy. And it has lots and lots of features here. So people say, some people are snobby about it and saying this is for people that don't know Houdini. I don't care. I've used Houdini for years. I think these are great to do 90% of the work you need to. You can just get on and have fun and create cool stuff rather than worrying about setting up these complex networks all the time. So I really like this kind of approach now. I'm going to click this little icon here to maximize this window and tap P to get a floating parameter pane, because now my network's getting a bit bigger. This will be easier to manage stuff. So we've got our ground in there and that's just sitting there. Let's create an object that we're going to whack this with. So I'm going to create a couple of attributes first. I'm going to create a name attribute here, which will help Houdini partition things. That's going to have to run through the fracture. And let's call this wall. And I'm also going to make a group node, which I'm also going to name wall. Just so I've got a name attribute so I can get access to this geometry later, and a group node so I can get access to this geometry later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a sphere to chuck at it. So there we go. There's our sphere. Let's make this 25 centimeters big. See, it doesn't always update until you hit enter. Let's move that to about here. Let's make it a polygon with lots of resolution. There we go, something like that. So let's also create a name and a group node here. So we know what this is. Let's call this ball. It was a good idea to make these couple of attributes, because then you can do stuff later. And this time I'm going to do an RBD configure. I'm going to do it separately. And we're going to this time come down here. Instead of being concrete, let's set this to metal and choose the preset that says steel. So we can give it the physical properties of metal and steel. On this configure here, which is my box, it's concrete. Let's set this actually to concrete. So there we go. We've got different materials. Now, how do we join these together? Well, we could use a merge node, but we've got all these branches. So what we do in Houdini, we use an RBD pack node. It's got nothing to do with pack primitives. It just flattens them into one branch, so you can merge them easily. So you can make multiple branches of lots of different objects like this. You merge them all together, and then you do an RBD unpack. So it just basically merges all the data streams for you. And then this is what you can plug into your solver now. Now we've combined our ball into our sim. And then I can merge in other streams like this with a configure node and a pack at the bottom. Easily just join them all together. So if I press play now, not very impressive. Let's add some velocity. Well, we can simply add it to the geometry. So what we can do is just create a point velocity node. Let's just pop that here. And we can give it a velocity in a direction of, if I look at my little axis down here, I can see the negative Z is this way. So let's put negative 10 in the Z. So that would push it this way. We can actually press play and see that go. There we go. Oh, it knocks the wall off the floor because the walls are not attached to the floor. So let's fix that. So these are the kind of issues you typically get. So in a simulation, we can mark objects as active or passive. The ground is passive, meaning it will collide with stuff, but it can't ever move. Whereas this guy is active, which means it can collide with stuff, but then it can get affected by it. What I want to do is turn a few bottom pieces down here into passive objects, so they'll never ever move. It's like they're permanently glued to the floor. But then the rest of the stuff will be glued to them, so it can snap off at that point, but it will give it something for the ball to fight against when it hits it. And again, we can do this with the configure node. Let's turn on the configure node. And in here at the top, we can turn on the active as a visualization. Now we're not seeing anything because we need to turn on the attribute here. Now it's created an active attribute, which it shows up as green. If we set that to 0, which is off, then the whole thing's passive. So I'll show you what happens if it's off, if it's passive. If I go down here and press play, you'll see it just bounces off. The wall will never ever move. So in here, if I set the attribute to 1, so it's all active, then that's what we started with. So what I want to do is make some of these points here passive, the ones at the bottom. And I can do it with this little toggle here. It says use bounds. So what are the bounds? Well, let's make a bound node. What this does, it makes a bounding box around your object. I'm going to plug in this last output, and you'll see it just makes a box that's not broken, that fits around my wall. I can bring up the lower padding so it comes up from the bottom here. Now, if I plug this into this last input, this is for the bounds. Let's turn this back on. And I turn on use bounds. You'll see now these guys are now passive. They're not they're never going to simulate. So if I hit it hard enough, it'll snap in this like this across the bottom. Okay. So let's see the effect of that. Let's go back to the solver. Now, if we hit play, you'll see it bounces off the wall. But the reason is our glue is too strong. Let's go and reduce the glue and see the effect of this. If we go to the constraint properties here, this is the glue for the wall because it's in the wall branch. So let's bring the glue strength down. Now you'll see my ball is able to smash a bit of a hole through the pieces. Now there's a slight issue. What I like to do is go to the solver advanced and then open up this dot network. And I like to increase the substeps to 2. This means we're going to solve subframe, and it just makes it that bit more accurate. If I press play now, you'll see it actually pushes all the way through, which is what it should have done. So we get a slightly more accurate result with an extra substep there. So I always work like this. There we go. So now we've got it properly punching its way through, and you'll see we've got an interesting different range of scale of pieces, which makes it feel more realistic. Got big ones, small ones, and really fine ones. Now there's a thing I don't like. This is this break here. it just kind of explodes outwards like this. Now, in real concrete, you've got, it's held together, so you get a sense of it stretches first before it breaks. There's what we call ductility, and you get a different kind of stretchiness with all materials. That's what tells you it's a different material. When it breaks like this is incredibly brittle. So this would suggest porcelain or something, because porcelain doesn't really stretch, it just breaks, a brittle material. But most other materials, and concrete as well, is a bit ductile. So we should see a bit more of a stretch shape here. So we can affect that with the constraints. And this is how you want to make it feel more realistic, things like the different shapes and sizes, and also how it breaks and the constraints. So on this constraint here, we can do a couple of things. The first thing you'll notice, it punches a hole that's pretty much the size of the ball. The first thing we can do is increase this propagation iterations here. This means it's going to punch a bigger hole. See, it affects much more further around it. It suggests the wall is much more brittle. You can see the force propagates up the glue there. If I put it back to 1, you'll see the hole is much more local to the ball. So I quite like the 10 actually. It's hitting with such force, it's going to tear the wall apart. But again, we're not getting the sense of that ductility or stretching. It sort of just punches through, and then this stuff falls down here. This should kind of be pulled with the force of it. So let's do that with the constraints now. So on the constraint properties, what we can do is, if we have a look, you'll see the glues represented by these yellow. We can see the constraints. As soon as it goes, the constraints disappear. It's either there or it isn't. And that's what allows the pieces just to fall. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the constraint when it breaks into another constraint. And that's very easy to do in this node here. We can turn this button on, and it's going to switch it to what's called a soft constraint. Let's see what that does. Let me go back to shaded mode. If I step forwards, you'll see it acts like a spring. And then it snaps everything back. So unlike glue, this doesn't disappear. It behaves like springs. But the bit I'm after is the initial bang here. Can you see how now we're getting this kind of stretchiness? You can see the bulge of the ball. And the pieces start to pull the pieces around them with the force. That's what we're trying to achieve. So it really suggests there's force within the wall. Lots of materials do this in a different way. And this is the kind of level of detail, if you want to work in movies, that you've got to think about, really. Let's make that a bit stiffer so it doesn't stretch so much. Let's try 100. That's kind of good. Because I wanted just a little bit of the ductility. The other thing you'll notice, it looks a bit weird, the shape, because they're all constrained from their centers, from the center of mass, which is not great. They should be constrained from the edges of where they're actually joined. So I'm just going to fix that. So again, we can do that with an RBD convert constraints. Where is it? Convert constraints. There it is. So I'm going to do that before the properties here, because I want to convert them before I change the properties. And instead of using center of mass, I'm going to do surface points. So now the constraints are at the edges instead of at the center. So let's step forwards a few frames. And now you can see that initial bang, it looks better. We can see they're more radial. They don't look, they're all coming out at the same angle before. Now they're looking a bit more radial. That might be better if I just make the glue a bit weaker, so we can see that a bit stronger, a bit more obviously. Oh, that didn't reevaluate. Let me do that properly. So another frame. There we go. You can see they're all now twisted with the angle correctly that they're being impacted with, and you get this really nice fracture there. But the problem is we want it to give up. We want it to break when the ball hits it. We want to get this shape and then have it break. So we can do that in this solver node. So in the solver node, we can go to constraints, and then we can use breaking thresholds. And you'll see here it's set up to break soft. If you look, that's the name in the properties here. Look, soft, it's the same name. So it's going to break that. So what we can do here is it's going to delete that constraint when we hit a condition here. Basically, if it's going to stretch more than 1 unit, which is 1 meter, that's a very big distance. So it's never going to break. If I put the distance to say 1 centimeter, and I step forwards, those constraints stretch 1 centimeter and then they'll break. And look, this is the different effect we get. We see some of them break because some of them stretched far enough, but some of them didn't. So we've got these nice effect where we've got the cracking, but it hasn't actually fallen apart yet. which you do see in concrete. And if it hits the ground hard enough and stretches far enough, then it will break up when it hits the ground, which it didn't in that case. So that's a much more different effect. Whoosh, like that. Which is kind of nice. We can also use torque, which is twisting motion. So let's put a torque value in. See what values we have. So again, look, torque is a twisting motion. So some of them twist. They don't twist enough to break up. And look, it gives us a different idea, like reinforced concrete, where you've got like rebar inside it. So maybe let's bring the torque down so it breaks a little easier. There you go. So that fractures a bit more in a different way. And you can use combinations of these things, but the important thing is that initial bang looks really natural. We've got big pieces, small pieces, and you can see it stretching out the forces up around the wall there. That's the kind of trick to making really nice looking, natural looking simulations. Should we live with that one? Yeah, let's live with that one. You could massage, you can use combinations of these as well. Look, you've got force and impact as well as distance. You can delete it at a frame or have this kick in from a particular frame so it can ignore these things, and you can do all sorts of combinations there, which is kind of nice. You can animate the values and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of cool looking. Or did I like the distance one? Let's look at the distance one again. And you can do it with angle as well. So we get a very different effect with the distance there at 1 centimeter. These ones around the edges didn't stretch as much. So if we make the constraint more stretchy, so if I bring this down, it's going to allow it to stretch more so that more of them are going to hit that distance. So everything works together. That's why you've got to do lots of tests. Let's press play and see if that the difference in that. So it was more stretchy, so look, they broke more easily and it didn't propagate as fast. So now we've punched a hole and we've left a crack. Actually, I quite like that one. Gosh. Let's preserve some of its integrity. We've broken through. Excellent. Let me save that. So let's go, let's do this over 30 frames, maybe 40 frames. So the next thing you want to do when you've done this is you want to do an RBD IO, which will let you cache this to disk. So if you're going to render it or use a render farm, plus, you know, you're saving it if you're caching it to disk, you can use this node. And it's got a couple of features here. If you're using a lot of geometry, then packed geometry is not a good way to go. Because you're going to create a huge file on disk. A really efficient way to use this is to use geometry and points. This is a more advanced version. So what this will do, it'll pack up your primitives. You'll get very, very few of them. Well, you'll get very few. The disk files, the files on disk will be very, very small, which will make the rendering a lot quicker. So I'm going to save to disk this single file, and then I'm just going to do save to disk for the whole sequence. Why is that giving me an error? So we've got the sim there. Oh, I got to plug the last input for the points. There we go. We didn't have to plug the points in. So save to disk, save to disk. We'll just cache that out. And then we can turn on load from disk. And you'll see it looks like the proper simulation, but the way to use this is to actually use the simulation points. So what we often use is a node called transform pieces. So with the transform pieces, we can take our original high-res geometry and we can use the points. So let me show you what the points are. So out of here, actually, we do get sort of a high-res version. We get our constraints, which we didn't save. We got a proxy version, which we didn't save. And out of here, we've got these points that represent the simulation. And these are very fast to read on and off disk. And what we can do is transform the original geometry as well. And it wants a static version of this on the first frame. So what we do is we use a time shift node here, and we just delete the expression. So it's only ever going to show frame 1 now. So look, that doesn't change. We plug that into this input that says rest points. And then we plug the template points are the ones that move. Now, if we look here, again, it looks exactly the same. We're actually using the geometry from before the sim. And this is much more efficient for rendering and playback and other stuff in Houdini. Let me add a null. So this is the output. for it. Oh, one thing we didn't do actually was add some UVs. Let's add some UVs. See, this is why it's nice and procedural. So look, we can just do UV unwrap. That's a good point. You might want to add a texture to the wall. And we can view that with a UV quick shade. This will just preview the UVs on there. So look, we've got nice mapping. And with space 5, you can see UV space here, and you can see they're laid out for our box. So again, I'm going to have to write out the cache again. So here I can just simply write out both bits. Oh, it's recalculating the fracture. So now I can save the sequence. Take a little longer because I didn't calculate the first 30 frames like before. So if you make any changes upstream of the cache, you've got to obviously rewrite the cache out to see the changes below. Well, I didn't need to in this case, actually, because I'm reading the geometry from here. So I didn't really need to read out the cache again, actually. But there, if we go back down here now, let's put our another quick shade here just to preview that. Oh, we might need to. Hang on, why is those attributes not coming through? Oh, because it's packed. So yeah, let's just unpack it so we can see them. There you go. So if we unpack it, we can see we've got the UVs on our object there. But it's best to leave it as packed because this is much more efficient. You'll see the whole thing's represented by 700 points. There's obviously a lot more than 700 points here. But if I do the point display, you'll see it's each point representing each chunk there. That's actually what we're going to be moving around. Cool. So what I want to do, let's call this wall. How much time we got? Got a few minutes. Let's try and add a debris pass quickly. Why is that doing my fracture again? We don't need that to do a fracture. But anyway, cool. So if I drag my slider, we can see that moving. So I'm going to make another node here for some debris. And I'm going to use an object merge node to bring in the geometry we just simulated. Let's turn that off for a sec. So this will bring in our wall, and there's our out node. So here's our animated geometry. So here I'm going to use what's called a debris source node to source the debris. And this is going to show us the points that we want to simulate there. Now we only want to see them when they're moving. So what I'm going to do is just add a wrangle, a point wrangle. This workflow will get simpler one day. So we'll say f at length, f at speed rather, equals the length of the velocity. So I'm finding out the length of velocity, which is basically the speed. And I'm going to say if the speed is less than a certain amount, we'll put a slider in for that, like this. And then what we'll do is, if it's smaller than that, we're going to remove the point. Put the right expression in, there we go. If we click this magic button, we get our slider. So look, if the speed is less than something really small, then it's going to delete them there. So look, as soon as they start moving, they appear. So we can make that a bit bigger. Something like this. We only see them like that. There we go. That looks a bit better. And you'll see they're living for a certain time here. I only want them to live for one frame. So I want to divide this by 24, which is my frames a second. So you'll see they just appear for one frame. Oh, let's maybe make the speed a bit bigger so we see some more. Maybe we'll make them last for a bit longer. So let's make them last for 2 frames. Maybe more, six of a frame. So we get that initial bang and then we get some falling out there afterwards. Cool. So yep, that's given us a bunch of points there. So what I want to do is one last little. I don't think I can do that on here. Let me just check something. Yeah, let's see if this works on this version. So we've got some debris here, which we can instance geometry to and add that into our simulation. If we look, we'll see the points get birthed there, but we can use a particle simulation or something. What I'm actually going to do is I've got my wall here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pack it back up into primitives. Let's create packed geometry. I'm going to add another wrangle. Just going to see if I can set this up quickly. This is kind of a cool trick. So I'm going to say the position equals the point position. So this is the position of each point, which resets them all to the origin there. So oh yeah, we've got the ball there, haven't we? Let's delete the ball. So we made those groups before, so that I can easily remove the ball now. Actually, I want to remove the ball from this branch too. We've still got those points, that's good. So that's removed the ball. So we've got all these chunks at the center here. And I'm just going to do an unpack on them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a copy to points. Now on this side, here's a little trick. Now I'm going to copy these to the points that we're creating. Now, when I do this, first thing I want to do actually is just do an RBD configure, because I want to create them into rigid body objects. So let's create an RBD configure. Hopefully this will work. So they've basically got the properties of concrete. I'm then going to take those packed objects here. That's that one that I want. Yep. And then on this side, I want to create some attributes. So the first one I'm going to do is create an attribute. We've got an attribute adjust integer. Yep, an attribute adjust integer. So this one's going to be called a variant attribute. So this is going to give me some random numbers. So let's create some random numbers between 0 and 9. Let me just show you what that does. So let's go to where we got some points. There we go. So it gives me an attribute here called variant, where each point has a random number between 1 and 9. Now over this side, what I'm going to do is create what's called an enumerate. And this will create another attribute here. Let's call that the same name, variant, because Houdini is going to match these up in a minute. If we look at this one, you'll see it's actually created an attribute called variant on the points. Let's set that to points. There we go. Which just goes in sequence 0, 1, 2, 3. And I see I've got 721 points. So in here I need to put 720 because we start from 0. 0. Actually, what number is that? No, 721 I want to go to. Yeah, 721. There we go. Which is actually one less than the number of points. We can actually use an expression to link that. So endpoints. Let's go back to the enumerate node. There we go. And it's returning endpoints. There we go. It's returning our 722. So let's take off 1. Why is that giving us an error? Shouldn't do. There we go. Anyway. So here on the points, we've got a random number picking of the number that we've got here. Now on this copy node, what we can do is on the copy node, we can say use this attribute called variant to make those copies. And you'll see it's copied now one chunk to each of those points, but a random chunk, which is the kind of trick we want. We also want to do an attribute randomize to randomize the scale of these. Oh. An attribute randomize. If we call this piece scale, again, the copy will use that. And we're getting random numbers between 0 and 1 here. A good thing to use is like the exponential one. And that means you'll get some big pieces and small pieces giving us this kind of scales that we wanted before. Let's make this really quite small. And you'll see we've randomized up the chunks. This is going to become the basis of our debris. So here I'm going to do a connectivity node now. And I'm going to give this a new string attribute called name. Sorry, name. And we'll call this debris. This is our debris chunks. So they've got a unique name attribute there. Why are they all, oh yeah, because we're on the copy to points there, that's fine. Cool. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in another bullet solver. If this works, let's turn on the ground. And I'm going to turn on emit rigid body. So it's going to emit them from those points. So if we press play, you'll see we're now emitting these into the scene. It's a little slow. It's because we've got a lot of points coming in. There we go. Let's just stop that a sec. You'll see we're actually emitting those into the scene and they'll bounce around. Let's go up to our debris source. And let's have an order less of them. So there you go. We get some debris being emitted in there. Let's have some more. There you go. So we get this nice effect, you know, lots of big pieces, small pieces coming out of our sim there. So if I come up here to my wall, we can see those pieces being added into the effect there. They're just being emitted, so you can't really tell they're not coming from there. They just add more detail. And this is the trick to making good shots. You want to add a lot more elements of this. And again, we can use the debris source to emit some pyro, but I haven't really got time to demonstrate that now. Last thing I want to do just before we take some Q&A is to add some lights and render this. Let's go back to debris. Let's just maybe put in some more points to make that look a bit better. There we go. And again, we can do our RBDIO. Write this out to disk. So for rendering. So yeah, let's just save this to disk. See how slow that is. Slower to process it. So yeah, you'll see the files aren't too big. There we go. So we load that in. Now we have that all simulated too. So if we come up here, we can see we've got, oh, why is that not playing back? It's, oh no, because it overwrote this one. Let me save this one out to disk again. Oh, that's a bit annoying. Yeah, because they both got the same name. One overwrote the other, I believe. Just make sure it's working again. So someone's asking, what would you recommend if you want to have the same impact render in slow motion? What language is that code? That code is VEX, Houdini's internal language, which again will teach you how to use. VEX is really, really awesome. There we go. Hopefully that's answered your question, Alexandra. Or Alejandra. So Darren, what would you recommend if you want to have the same impact in slow motion? Well, you can actually do that easily. You can use a retime. So let me plug the retime here. Let me do it on the points. In the retime here, we can halve the speed. So I press play now. Halving the speed, let's do 0.1. Maybe that's not doing it on the points. Let's do it on the geometry afterwards. Oh yeah, because that's the rest one. These are the points that are moving. There we go. So let's do half the speed. Yeah, this is the rest one after the time shift. This is the one that's moving. So there you go. See, it's slowed down. So if I do 0.1, there's some artifacts because it's interpolating the point positions. Let's turn that off. There we go. So that's it in slow-mo. What do you think? So let's extend the frames to 80. That looks pretty cool, right? So let's try the retime on our debris. Same one, I copied and pasted it, so it's in slow-mo too. Kind of gives the game away, doesn't it, the debris, because it does pop on. Maybe you don't want to see it in slow-mo. Let's turn it off. Turn it off. Maybe that was 1/10 of the speed, so that's a little bit slow. We'll go back to real time. That was back at 40 frames. Hopefully that answered you the question there, Darren. Oh, I'm pleased you're liking the webinar. Yeah, we do these quite often. So yeah, keep your eyes out for them. So the last bit I just want to show is a quick bit of rendering. Let me just save that. So the nice thing about Houdini is you can just pick a view, control click the camera, and it drops into your view. You must remember to lock the camera so you can still navigate. Let's go. I don't want to be close to an exploding wall. So again, I'm going to use a long lens. And again, if you come to Escape, we explain all about the cinematography because it's important, you know, especially if you're going to be working in movies. So there you go. A long lens means we're far away and safe distance. So I'm going to add an environment light, and this is allow me to use the technique called image-based lighting, or IBL. And for that, we need an HDR. So Houdini comes with some HDRs. If you click on this little thing when you do a file browser, HFS is where Houdini's installed, and these are the ones it comes with. So let's choose this one. You see it in the background there. Let me go to the rotation here, just rotate it around so we can change the lighting a bit. In fact, it's hard to tell which way we're facing. Let's look up there, and I want to see the sun appear. So I know it's behind me. There we go, something like that. Look through the camera again. Let's add a ground plane. That would help as well. So let's add a grid, make that big. Excellent. So we've got our camera set up, our light, our image-based lighting, and our wall. Let's add a material. So since we added a text, we've got UVs on there. We could add, let's make it marble. So put marble on there. We'll put clay on the floor. And where's our ball? Our ball will be made of marble, actually, in this case. But there you go. Let's pick a nice frame. Stuff coming in. So we need to create a mantra node. So let's do a mantra node here. Everything in the Houdini is a node. Let's do this half res so it's quicker. And then let me just set up these displays. Let me save again. And again, let's turn on motion blur. I need to do 2 samples to see the motion blur. Again, we explain all the settings. Kushal is asking, do you have any YouTube channels or other websites where you post videos regularly? I do on our own website. So if you look around Escape's website, you'll find a lot, and YouTube channels and Vimeo channels, you'll find lots of my videos. And if you go to Side Effects' own website, I publish a few videos for them too. So keep an eye out there. I just did one last week actually on simulations in Flip, doing a massive smashing wave against the lighthouse. So have a look on the Side Effects website and Escape's website. You will find plenty more tutorials from me and lots of others from other people too. Don't know if you like listening to my voice. Obviously, you can come along a course and I'll teach you Duck personally, so even better. So there we go. We can see that smashing through with some motion blur there. We'll just jump through a few frames. You can see the IPR working. Updating and giving us a rather nice render with the motion blur. The motion blur is quite strong, so we can adjust that in the camera. Where are we? It's in the sampling here. It's the shutter time. If I make a smaller shutter time, then we'll see smaller motion blur. It's less blurry. If I make it bigger, you'll see these chunks here will blur more because they're moving quicker. And you can see we've got the blur on the ball and the blur on the debris and the blur on the rest of it. Cool. So what I might do is actually see if we can get away with a little time shift, a little retime. So let's maybe put this maybe 0.75 slower. What I'm going to do is just copy this parameter with a right click, copy parameter, and I can actually link that to this one in here. Let's turn this one on because I want them to be the same speed. If I do paste relative reference, it puts in a little expression here, and you'll see it returns to the same number. So I don't need to now set them both. I can set one and the other one will update with the same speed. So now if we, let me turn the lighting off so it's easier to see. So here I can Flipbook it, right click here, Flipbook. Let me just turn off the resolution there. So this will now give me a Flipbook so I can get a real sense of the timing before I render, because the render is going to take a while to go. So let's, well, there we go. So we get a sense of the timing there. Gosh, oh, the lighting's gone funny. Maybe I shouldn't have turned that off. That's better lighting. Let's do that again. Because we've cached it all out, it's very quick to play back. But hopefully this has given you an idea on sort of the level of detail that we teach at Escape. And you know, the care that we think about the effects and the look of stuff, you know, and the sort of the technical stuff. I mean, obviously that debris needs a lot more work than just a quick whack of this.